I figure I'll throw one more of these draft science videos out there. Some more stuff on this quantum stuff, sort of, but it's more just about energy and electrons and photons and how they behave, and this whole idea of multiverses and, you know, many verses and all the rest of this mumbo jumbo that I don't think has anything to do with anything. It's just kind of made up. It's just speculation. It's just like they found a hoof print and they say, oh, it must have been a unicorn because unicorns have hooves, you know, and it's that kind of thing. Alright, so to Pyro, who, you know, we sort of agree, we sort of got through some stuff. I don't think he's conceding that, okay, yes, it's not the photon or the electron isn't interacting with itself, it's interacting with itself in 14 other dimensions or some other mumbo jumbo. But at least, you know, the concessions are made, and I made what mistakes I made. And so anyway, moving forward. Alright, so Pyro, I'll use another example of a circumstance that indicates this probability stuff, like the two-slit thing, but it also indicates that, you know, there's something else going on than multiverses, I think, is an explanation. So there's this other phenomenon about electrons, and you brought up magnetic fields. Alright, so electrons, as I understand it, I mean, they have energy levels or a spin, whatever you want to call it. And so if you orient them in some direction, let's say you orient them at a east-west direction, and then put them in a strong magnetic field, when they change direction in that field, depending on their initial position, they will release a photon, a quantum of energy. All right, and they can only release one photon. They don't have a choice. So if they're perfectly opposite, say they're pointing north-south and the magnetic field is south-north, they will every single time release a photon. All right, and then when they're at any degree from that 180 degree opposite, they will, by probability, release an electron. So like if they're at 10 degrees, they would have to move an entire 90 degrees, so then 9 out of 10 times they will release a photon, but one time they will not. And so if they're at 50-50, you know, at going east-west and to the north-south, there would be a 50-50. So that means half the time the electron will release a photon, the other half it won't, by probability. So obviously there's some sort of circumstance where almost the opposite of what I brought up in other circumstances, where something's being converted from an analog reality to a digital reality based on what the electron is capable of. All right, so but there has to be something that decides in each circumstance what triggers how that electron will behave, whether it does release the photon or it doesn't. I mean, something has to make this balance out at the end. Something has to tilt the coin one way or the other. You know, I mean, so I think that's worth discussing. I mean, the idea that each electron is existing in, you know, whatever number of other dimensions, and that each one has a different orientation, even though it's not really possible. And even if they all have the same orientation in 10 different dimensions, it still doesn't make up. There have to be 100 different dimensions or 1,000 different dimensions, because the analog amount can be any degree. I mean, it's not fixed at just 10 degrees or 15 degrees. No, it can be 12 degrees. It can be 12.5 degrees. So, I mean, it really doesn't make any sense to say there's a parallel universe for each single degree difference, you know, and that we're only in the universe where, oh, well, that one just happened not to work this time, but it will work the next time, and somehow the electrons would all be interacting with each other, and somehow that would have some effect on which one triggers and which one doesn't. I mean, there's something else going on there, and whatever else is controlling that probability is likely controlling whatever probability takes place with the wave function that you end up having as a display function for photons through the two-slit experiment. So anyway, yeah, I don't have really an answer. I mean, I can go back to my answer I had in one of my way previous videos, where I indicated that the fact that when you have the detectors on, that somehow this phenomenon of the wave function is erased sort of indicates a memory, sort of indicates, or if not a memory, that each photon might have some sort of gravity that we're not detecting, some sort of force in front of it that might create the wave function, and that the photon itself follows the wave function. And so the wave function essentially is in front of the proton or photon or the electron, and that it can only take paths that are provided through that function. And some of this might be applicable to the whole circumstance. I mean, there is a fact that we have all this electromagnetic energy swishing through us all the time. I mean, microwaves, radio waves, they're all bombarding us all at the same time. And how do all these waves, all this electromagnetic force, all these particles, waves, whatever they are, all this force, all this energy, how does it not bang into each other in front of us? How do all these forces interact without ever releasing any photons? I mean, we don't see just photons pop up out of nowhere in the middle of, right in front of us, because there must be collisions, there must be, so there's something here that maybe these things don't collide because they do have something in front of them that is basically does the colliding for them ahead of time, and therefore makes it impossible for them to actually hit each other because the force in front of them does the interacting ahead of time. So maybe something like that. Anyway, so I have to think it through some more. But there's an explanation for this that doesn't oblige us to start going into this whole phantasmagorical, and it really is. I mean, the whole multi-dimensional crap is phantasmagorical. I mean, there's nothing there. I mean, really nothing. So anyway, and then you talked about tunneling this and microscopes and all that crap, and really that just has again to do with the fact that through using quantum mechanics, they're able to eliminate, filter a lot of errors out. And so it's basically just a way of, it's just like digital enhancement of, old movies or something. It's a way of filtering out the bugs and the flickers and the garbage out of the technology that already existed. So it's an enhancement, but it's not an enhancement I don't think we wouldn't have discovered if we don't think in terms of multi-universes. I think we could certainly discover it without thinking in terms of multi-universes. So anyway, enough said. So anyway, just draft science. This one's purely draft because I'm not expressing any opinion, just throwing the crap out there and saying, how is frequency, how does a particle have a frequency if it doesn't have it as a mass? And the frequencies can certainly be expressed in collections of things. Okay, so I mean that's the catch here too. Is like sound works so much different than particles. I mean, sound is movement of energy through an atmosphere, so it's going through matter. It's a change taking place in matter. It's not necessarily the actual movement of, it's a vibration, it's a transmission of a state, not necessarily the actual transmission of matter. Where electrons really do, shoot out into space and bounce off of things and all that stuff. So I mean, that phenomenon's a little different than sound waves, and how the frequency and the wavelength is manifest. Is it manifest in the particles, or is it manifest in the stream of particles? I mean, this gets really complicated, but I mean, these are questions that sort of need to be answered before we should even start heading for multiverses and all that other stuff. I think we ought to have a decent diagram of how these things are manifest in the particles. So I think that's enough. So anyway, just throwing it out there. Draft science. Draft. Really, just draft.